You're listening to Ecosysteming, the podcast redefining economic development through the lens of equitable entrepreneurship, 2 decades in the making. Join NC Idea's Tom Rue as he engages with entrepreneurs and experts who are challenging the status quo and driving lasting change.
Welcome to listeners of the Ecosysteming podcast. Today, I got to tell you, I always say I'm looking forward to my guest, but this time I'm really looking forward to my guest because he is a veteran of the North Carolina entrepreneurial ecosystem. You know him, you love him. He's Jim Roberts, founder of Network for Entrepreneurs in Wilmington. Jim, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to chatting it up for a while and sharing a lot of the what I call the wisdom of the scars.
Yeah, the wisdom of the scars. You know, let's just jump into something that might be a little painful right out of the gate. Is it true you are a graduate of the University of Florida?
That is correct. Obnoxious as I am the most obnoxious Gator fan in the state of North Carolina, which is very timely after our win on Tuesday over the Tar Heels. I wasn't front row, but they could hear me on the floor. I guarantee you, I was loud.
Oh, so you must be speaking of basketball.
Yes, the round ball that has.
I got it. Does the University of Florida have a football team?
We do. Well, we're on the rebound.
Okay.
We've been bad for a couple of years, but we're improving.
You know, and I really have no position to be teasing you because I barely graduated from a mediocre, state school in the Mid-American Conference, otherwise known as Bowling Green State University. And for the uninitiated, that is not in Kentucky. That is Bowling Green, Ohio, a suburb, if you will, of Toledo. That beautiful piece of geography that is about as flat as Kansas, but instead of corn and wheat, it is known for tomato growing. But yeah, that was a big one. Always driving between Cleveland and BG. That was kind of the big summer crop then. But hey, before we jump into kind of the depths of the ecosystem, for those who don't know you, a brief, and Jim, I'm saying brief, bio. Why don't you just give everybody a little flavor of who you are, and we'll plumb more of that experience as we get into the meat of the conversation. But 60 seconds. Who's Jim Roberts?
So as you hear, I'm not a native Southerner. I'm a Chicago kid. After University of Florida, I moved to Atlanta. After Atlanta, moved to Charlotte, and in the year 2000, started the very first technology entrepreneur organization in the city of Charlotte in the year 2000, which of course, here comes the dot-com crash and 9/11, and got recruited to Asheville, North Carolina to open their entrepreneur council called the Blue Ridge Entrepreneurial Council and the Blue Ridge Angel Investor Network. Eventually moved to Raleigh, worked for the North Carolina Department of Commerce in international trade. I worked for the Biotech Center for a few years in a short-lived organization called the Center of Innovation for Nanobio, and then got recruited to Wilmington to open the UNCW CIE incubator. And within 24 months of opening that incubator, we were ranked one of the top 50 incubators in the country with a nice grant from the SBA awarded at the White House. And then in 2015, I started the Network for Entrepreneurs in Wilmington, and we're rocking and rolling at the coast.
So I think it was a year into new when you and I met, because I started in 2016.
Yep. I started in April of 2015, May of 2015.
So 11 months after you started, I started March of 2016. And I don't know if you remember our first conversation, but it was shortly after I started. And to your credit, you were one of the first in the ecosystem to reach out to me. And in that very first year, I still was commuting between Cleveland. So you're a Chicago kid, I'm a Cleveland kid.
Mm-hmm.
So we're both, neither of us are sons of the South. But I was, my wife and youngest child was still in her senior year in high school. My other two were already out of the house. So weekends, about every other weekend, maybe every third weekend, I was heading back up to Cleveland. And you reached out and you're like, hey, can we chat? And I'm like, well, it's 8.5 hours in the car. So sure. And I remember that first conversation went about 2 hours, if memory serves. And it was pleasant. I really enjoyed your perspective and like where you had been. It was a very nice crash course on kind of the statewide, assessment of the ecosystem, which I think I have to say for the benefit of listeners, back then, NC Idea was not known as a statewide, ecosystem player. We were obviously known in the Triangle. 90% of our funding went to white dudes in the Triangle. And then every once in a while we'd screw up and fund a white guy in Charlotte. So some people in Charlotte knew of us.
Right. But I also knew your predecessor. I knew Mr. Rizzo from his time in Charlotte. He would actually come to my events that I was having with my organization called First Round. And so we knew each other pretty well. So I was not a stranger to your organization. And actually, Mr. Rizzo and Andrea made a trip and gave the workshop, kind of that grant workshop that you guys do within the first year of opening the incubator in Wilmington.
Yeah, Dave was by all accounts, a real player in the ecosystem. And we're very fortunate that, they had the foresight, he and John Cambier and a few other folks in those early days, to kind of wrestle that what became the initial endowment out of state control and get it, sequestered into what is today NC Idea. And I have to tell you, he passed much too early and too young, but I was very happy that we were able to kind of recognize his contribution at our 2019 summit. And I think he was very much moved by that as well, because we owe him a lot. And so I tell you, I feel a certain sense of duty and obligation to him, even 9 years now into my job, because what they started was something special, and it's a privilege to do this kind of work. Having been at a very, very large private foundation prior to coming here, the once mighty Kauffman Foundation, you realize the kind of preferential privilege status that a PF, as we refer to a private foundation, has. It's a lot of latitude and flexibility to kind of look at the situation. And when you're not funded by people, you can speak truth to power, and you can take kind of a different perspective and try to encourage others to do likewise and take the long view, so to speak. But
truth to power would be fun. Yeah, I'd like that.
Well, you know what? I'm going to jump to that point. I have that teed up for a little later, but since we're kind of teeing it up now, truth to power. Some people would say that being a contrarian is an asset in this line of work. Being that truth sayer to power. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with it, but it also has costs. I am a contrarian. I don't take the Chamber of Commerce kind of blue sky, rainbows and roses that boosterism really is the favorite kind of paragraph of the day, because it's just, there are always challenges.
Well, what do you got against that? What do you got against the boosterism? What's wrong with kind of rooting for your home school?
Because it doesn't address the problems. If everything's rainbows, you have to address the problems of today, or they get bigger tomorrow. And there's always a cost that you're seen as a negative person in the community, when that's not the reality. Is I'm trying to create solutions. I'm not just complaining about the situation, but I'm trying to come up with solutions so the problems don't get worse.
What? Wait a minute. Back the truck up.
Uh-oh.
What problems? Don't you know? Don't you read our press clippings? We are some years the best state in the nation for doing business. Now, we just missed it for this past year by one spot, but we'll be back. I'm pretty confident we'll get it back next year. So, how is there possibly any problems if we're the best state in the nation for doing business? Jim Roberts, explain yourself.
Well, those are economic development rankings that aren't necessarily talking about entrepreneur development. They're not talking about small business. They're talking about, how much land have you sold for an economic development program, or how many jobs did that create or promise to create. I assure you, and you know better than any of us, that there are real problems in the entrepreneur ecosystem of raising money for women entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, for minority entrepreneurs, for people that aren't related to the good old boy network. And as you and I started this conversation, neither one of us are part of that good old boy network.
No, sir, we are not.
My family is not from the South, so I had to make a name for myself, and of course, unfortunately, burned some bridges along the way. But I'm very I have every right to be ambitious as much as any entrepreneur does, and I'm trying to accomplish things, even if that doesn't mean personal financial gain. I'm trying to make the world a better place for my son, who's now 17, and that's part of my motivation every day.
Now, I get it, leaving the world a better place. And the other thing I would say about that, those bragging rights around best state for doing business, what a lot of people, and I mean, when I say a lot of people, I mean like 99.9% of the people don't know. And it's a lot that they don't know. But what they don't know is that a lot of those criteria are like you have a low unionization workforce, right? You have lax environmental restrictions and controls. You have lower than average minimum wages, right? Like, so the things that big business would necessarily look at as a scorecard and say, ooh, that's good, to most lay people, that's not necessarily the things that we should be crowing about, right? Recently, it just came out the scorecards around the state spending level on education, which has been, for quite some time in the bottom five, and in some categories, the bottom two, for as advanced, and all the good things going for the state of North Carolina. The fact that we're 49th in the country on what we per capita spend per student blows my mind. If we were, a state that's on the verge of bankruptcy and, billions in bonds that that we had to issue and are on the hook for, as opposed to one that's got billions in surplus, you might be a little more forgiving, right?
Well, I mean, it's the 1950s mentality before the RTP was created, right? The RTP was created to reduce the brain drain of college graduates moving away. What if you invested in early stage brains just the same way to make them even better and brighter when they do enter the workforce? And
What a novel concept.
that's certainly not a good ranking. Is that's I mean, my parents are both public school educators, so I'm certainly aware of the value of an education.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. There's I don't even debate that with anybody anymore, right? If I have to debate that with you, then you're just willfully uninformed, and I prefer not to waste my time speaking to you.
Sure.
So that is what it is. All right, so let's jump into kind of the depths of the ecosystem. How would you characterize, this thing of ours, as you hear us evangelize, right? It's not an NCIDEA thing; it's a collective thing. And I know in the 9 years I've been in this role, it seems like it's going in the right direction, but there's gaps still everywhere. And well, I'm going to shut up and stop trying to lead the witness here, and let's hear from the expert. What's your take on what the statewide ecosystem is?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of opportunities for growth, even though we're doing really well as a state. I appreciate all the work that you've done in the triad to boost their numbers and what they're doing. Um, your work for the Black Entrepreneur Council is hopefully a model for many other states on a way to improve the really bad numbers of investing in minority entrepreneurs and your next movement into the rural communities where, the place where my father chose to move to from Chicago was a town with 1,500 people, the last rural county in Central Florida. So many of my high school friends are still there and doing the work of America as police people or public school teachers. So I appreciate what you've done in the organization the impact that your organization has had. But there is still a lot of work to do. And I think Wilmington is going to be a really good model for cities that want to build an ecosystem from scratch. When 2013, when I arrived, there really wasn't a lot of infrastructure. There weren't many patents being applied for, much less one. The term SBIR was really foreign to a lot of people, that there were federal grants to help innovative young companies. Venture capital was very isolated because there was no connection between the Raleigh ecosystem where the assets are and the resources are and the coastal community. There was kind of an intentional block of, why would we want to partner with Raleigh? Wouldn't Raleigh want to steal our young startups? And that's never been true. Our entrepreneurs felt very isolated, and within 10 years we have eliminated that sense of isolation. We're no closer in Wilmington than Charlotte is to Raleigh. And I think we have developed a really good partnership. There's at least a dozen people from the Triangle that make our events on a monthly basis. And that has had a really big impact on, I would say, just the optimism in the room of, hey, come up to the Triangle and we'll go have a beer and I'll introduce you to these three people that you need to know.
Yeah, you are a very big advocate for every event I've been to at the beach. You are very consistent, to your credit, to say, y'all, you got to get to the Triangle, and I think that's been reflected. As a matter of fact, we recently did the podcast with Tim McLaughlin, and he was telling me about the portfolio companies he has in Wilmington now, and we invoked your name. So if your ears were tingling the other day, it was because I said, "Oh, that's got to just be music to Jim Roberts' ears to hear." And Tim very happily and genuinely, right? He was like, "Oh yeah, I'm in Wilmington like at least once a month,
Right.
and for good reason." So I'm sorry I interrupted your mojo there. I apologize.
No, that's okay. I mean, I'm happy to hear that. I mean, I take my advocacy very seriously. That is part of one of the 5 things that I promote. If you're building an ecosystem, advocacy has to be a part of that. So I serve as a core reviewer for NC IDEA. I am on the awards committee for the North Carolina Technology Association and their annual event. I am on the selection committee for companies that go on stage at CED. And those roles are very important to me, to be in the room where decisions are made. And if your city is not represented, um, that's a problem that needs to be addressed. You need to find a way to get into those 3 rooms.
Yeah, and we appreciate your service on the core review team. Um, I asked Tim and a few others that are still on the docket that serve likewise as a core reviewer that oh, it was Jose Alvarez. We spoke to him also recently, and Jose just gave his assessment of that particular thing and said that in and of itself is like a little slice or a microcosm of the bigger ecosystem. And he just loves it. I mean, those were his words. He says he looks forward to it. Yes, it's a lot of work doing the reviews in a thoughtful way, which, if you are taking it seriously, it can
Right.
take some time, right?
Right.
Tim, for his part, he signs every one, which most of our reviewers don't, and that's not an expectation. And I include staff on that, but it's a little bit more nuanced in our case because we don't want we want a certain parity on when we're evaluating proposals. But you've been in the room where it happens, so that kind of dynamic, right? That little culture we've got going in that. And then the joy when it's finals day and, 10 to 12 companies come up and pitch, and, we're all empathetic with their nervousness and anxiety, and then, the bartering and
Well, to be honest, that's my favorite part of any of this is I love that nervous energy from the entrepreneurs. I just love it. Whether it's a pitch contest or the finalist stage of NC Idea, I love that nervous energy of this is my one shot and I got to get it right.
I do too. I think it's a really magical moment. But I have to confess, there's a couple events that just a little bit more that I enjoy. I love our ecosystem partner network summer event, because that's when we all stand shoulder to shoulder. And when I say us, I mean there's a bigger us that we see at our annual statewide ecosystem summit, and that's taking on the feel of a family reunion, which is magical and that's cool. But let's be candid, right? Like, not everybody in that room is doing the work. So our summer partner meeting, it's much smaller. It's, maybe 100 people. That's where we kind of let y'all know first before it's public, some stuff that we think we've got in the works. And y'all are like working on the work, right? And everybody brings an ask and an offer. And that one just feels magical to me, because that's where actual work is getting done.
I think that's also a chance to share best practices of somebody saying in the room, hey, I need help with this topic in my ecosystem. What is somebody in the room? What have you done in your community to create a solution for that? And so I enjoy that event as well.
Yeah. And as someone who's done this work, I mean, not just coast to coast, but on a global scale, I know how rare that is. I know how rare that it is firsthand, right? Because a lot of states, some of which, are considered a little bit stronger than us in kind of entrepreneurship and supporting startups, they're, quote, better, unquote, than us in like the big things like private equity investments and invention disclosures, but they're not even close, can't handle us in, co-opetition and collaboration. And I think that is something that North Carolina really excels at.
Well, I'll give you credit for introducing me to Jose. We probably would not have met without NC Idea, and I share ideas with him all the time, and he and I become very good friends. So thank you for that chance to build on a family that I didn't know. So I consider Tim and Jose very good friends.
And I know Jose would feel likewise. You and he being founding members of the 910 Club, complete with your swag. And for listeners of the podcast, we actually record this with video, so there's a little extra flavor in this banter because we can see each other. And Jim's rocking his area code 910 hat, which I think it was at the finals day or at one of our meetings when we bring everybody together. They were like two fraternity brothers showing their colors, their 910 baseball caps. But that esprit de corps is important, right?
Oh, sure. It's and there's many other members of that finalist group that I've enjoyed getting to know. Tom Colopy has become one of my trusted people of, hey, I've got this impossible solution. Can I, share some brain cells with me on things that I could do to help this entrepreneur. So, and Jay Bigelow and I are friends as well. Certainly, CED is someone that I have really modeled my career after for 25 years. So, as I said, all the smart people are in the room and there to make more of NC Idea and make more things possible.
Well, I don't mean to out you, but when I see you yucking it up with Jay, usually John Austin is somewhere in the presence and maybe John Cambier. I've always suspected that you're auditioning for membership into the Curmudgeon Club. You're curmudgeon adjacent.
I thought I already had my membership card.
I would maybe some people would think you are. I think you're
Okay.
curmudgeon adjacent, but
Yes. Okay.
but aspiring too. Hence our conversation about being contrarian in this line of work. Um, but the common thing with these people that we're name dropping, and several of which we've recorded already, and you'll be seeing podcasts or you'll be hearing podcasts coming out for them. But one of the common things is that I think we all recognize an obligation to be a connector, in this ecosystem. So let me ask you, as probably one of the best in the statewide ecosystem, how do good connectors work in an ecosystem? What does that mean?
Well, I'll give you a perfect example. We had a new entrepreneur that attended the CED Venture Connect last year, and I pulled in Jay and Hunter into a conversation with these three entrepreneurs who were new to me, but they weren't necessarily new to Wilmington. And they didn't really know who they should meet among the 1,100 people in the room. And I said, hey, these guys are in the health tech space, in the aging tech space. Who in the room is in that, investor space? And Jay and Hunter rattled off 4 or 5 names and sent us off, and I found those people and made those introductions. So whether or not any investment came from them, at least there's an optimistic handoff of these are possible investors. Now it's up to you to land the deal, but you're no longer in a room full of strangers. You just met 4 of the best connectors in the whole state of North Carolina, and you're in a room fishing, you're kind of fishing in a barrel because we're all limited in space, so they can't get away. Just have a conversation and hope you get a second meeting. That's what connecting is all about. I think that's probably one of the top things that I've done for Wilmington is we've had 125 investors now come and speak at our events that were from outside of the area. And people like Tim McLaughlin, people like Joe Colopy, some angel investors that have put some money into entrepreneurs and startups at the coast. And again, that really wasn't happening 10 years ago. So there's value in that connecting. The challenge of, I think, why more people don't do it is because there's no way to monetize it. There's no way to make money from it other than you hope that it comes around someday and you get a return favor. That's part of a challenge of, I think, why more people don't do it.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a leap of faith. It's somewhat altruistic, right, to do that, and I think this is okay. Like you kind of let your altruism motivate you, but I don't think there's anything wrong with hoping that you're putting coupons in the karma
Right.
bank that may come back, and you never know when that plays. So it's kind of my life philosophy that whenever you have an opportunity to put coupons in the karma bank, go ahead and do so, because they can pay you back in very unexpected ways. And when I'm hearing you talk about these connectors, to me that means community, right? Like this intentional community. And I remember it was, again, back to my time at Kaufman when we created the 1 million cups, right? This was one of my programs, portfolio programs, that we launched. And I was at an event speaking, and there were several hundred people in the room, and I was seeing connections being made, right? Like founders, investors. We had one of our 1 million cups, a founder, a young man that was doing game controllers. He was customizing game controllers with NCAA logos and mascots. He had a licensing deal, but he was literally receiving and sending 40 packages a day from his mother's basement. So he had to get the hell out of there. And so he goes up, he does his pitch, and then there's always an ask, like, hey, how can the community support you? And he's like, hey, I need a space. I need 5,000 square feet of warehouse space. And there was this old guy, out of just curiosity, owned several buildings in the warehouse district in Kansas City, and he's like, kid, I got a space for you, and you can just have it for 6 to 12 months, and then we can talk about rent. So then at that moment, I had this, lucidity, like this moment, this aha moment that community as a form of currency, right, were very valuable. So it doesn't get converted directly into cash, but the fact that you can be connected to somebody that can help you is as valuable to you as somebody writing you a check, right? It's a form of currency. Unlike a fiat currency, like the value of it is predetermined by a market and just sits in your wallet and it retains that, you do have to work it. To your point, when you're saying like, hey, I'm going to take you by the hand, I'm going to make you aware or introduce you to these people. So if there were a user manual, it would say, see the community for what it is and exploit it. And I mean that in a good way, right?
Right.
Use it, leverage it, probably better language to use.
Yeah, I mean, A Million Cups has been a great addition to the Wilmington area. If I would say, if anything has built a sense of community, it has been A Million Cups, because it's the same 25 to 40 people that come every week. And eventually you get to personally know the people in the room. And frankly, those become your social network. If we're going to say that entrepreneurship is very lonely, here's a place where every Wednesday you can see your 25 friends and it becomes like going to the bar at Cheers. Hey, George, welcome. Hey, Jordan, nice to see you. Hey, Jack, nice to see you. Hey, Heather, uh, I read something in your newsletter. Tell me more about it. And it really has become a sense of community because it is consistent every Wednesday at 9 a.m.
Did I ever tell you how we accidentally created 1 million cups?
We have talked about that before. Yeah,
Well, I'm going to make you listen to it again for the benefit of the listener.
that's fine.
So how that came to be was my team. So I was vice president of entrepreneurship and over all the entrepreneurship programming at Kauffman at the time, which included ecosystem building, education, access to capital, the whole ball of wax. And we struggled a little bit in getting buy-in at home, right? It's hard to be a sage in your own land. And so, we'd go into our big company-wide meetings, and, the rest of the foundation would just think, oh, those are the crazy ones, right? I sequestered us in a different wing of the building. We kept the odd hours, right? Like, it was 5:00, people just streamed out of that place and we were just getting started. Now, to be fair, most of them were in by 8, and, we were cruising in between 9 and 10. But like, we were those outsiders, and we're just like, they just don't understand it because they haven't been exposed to it. That was like that weird truism, because Kauffman does so much for community. That's like education and social type work. So they didn't really know that. So we're like, what if we brought in a couple entrepreneurs, weekly? Back then, the foundation served breakfast. We picked Wednesday to kind of break up the week. And we said to, staff at the foundation, grab your breakfast. Matter of fact, we were doing it in the cafeteria, the employee eating area at the time, because it was only for employees. And we get like maybe 2 dozen, kind of like what you get on a weekly basis. And the format started evolving, and the employees, they loved it. Like, they started learning about entrepreneurship more. And then kind of our portfolio started to take on more meaning and make sense for them all. And then, a couple of the staff, Nate and Cameron in particular, if we had to give founding credit, it would be those two that said, hey, this might have commercial application, right? So we kind of did what entrepreneurs do. And that's how I ran, that division as a startup. We always experimented, did micro experiments. Something fails. All right, so what? Move on. And so we did our first, public call, and 30 people from the community showed up. We didn't really advertise it hard because you have to understand that the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City is like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory before he opens it up. So it was considered pretty much shrouded in mystery. So when we finally said, okay, we're opening the foundation to doing this thing, 1 million cups routinely would be 300 people.
Wow. Yeah.
So every Wednesday, and it, unintended consequences, right? The parking lots were overfilled on Wednesdays. People.
Now your food costs just went up significantly.
Well, that's when we stopped doing the breakfast because we learned if you're giving them free breakfast, some people would show up. So that's why we just went downstream back to just coffee. And even then, you're providing coffee for 300 people, right? But what an experience for those entrepreneurs, because now they're doing a pitch day. They have an opportunity to do a pitch day, but in a very, very, very safe and nurturing environment. I mean, the people that would spontaneously jump up and say, hey, when you said this kind of to try to stick your landing, it didn't really hit the mark. Maybe you want to consider saying it like this, right? And then always we had to push people out of the foundation, well past 10. Like, you guys keep talking. There's 27 coffee shops around, Kansas City.
You don't have to you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
You
Yeah.
don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Right. And what a happy problem that was. And that's when we knew we had something. And then we started slowly kind of in the geographic region. I think St. Louis was one of the early cities, and then it just took off. Right. And like so many good things, right? It almost happens by accident. But again, to the credit of y'all in Wilmington, you grabbed a franchise and you're making it work, right? And for what it's intended to do.
Well, I was on the RTP 1 Million Cups committee when that was really going, because we would get 85 to 100 people. And then I wanted to do something a little different. So I created my own version of it. It was called the Rising Tide Breakfast. And then when I left CIE, Laura Brogdon wanted to continue, but she wanted to use the Million Cups brand. So I was on her committee when we started a Million Cups in Wilmington. And unfortunately, pretty soon after that, there was the pandemic kind of shut down everything, but they were still doing it virtually. And now that it's back, there's a young person in our community named Jack Fleming, who we kind of handed over the reins to. And I help him find new startups to present. And A Million Cups is alive and well and thriving in Wilmington. And I really recommend it for other communities looking for ways to build an ecosystem. This should be one of the first things that you do in your community.
I mean, it's easy, it's low risk. So yeah, I'm right there with you on that. And I will say, paternalistically, it is a source of pride that, when I came here and saw, I think at the time, at least 3, maybe even 4 franchises going, that was like, okay, that's kind of cool. And why not, right? It's a tool. Speaking of tools, that we kind of use to measure impact, I know you're a big fan of Startup Blink. You just sent me the new release.
Did you get an email this morning?
I might have.
I see.
I might have. I might have also found in the latest report that, quote, Wilmington's jump of 10 spots to 22nd in the U.S. and 32 spots to 61st in the world has been truly remarkable. And now it stands at its best position since its first appearance in the index. I don't suppose you saw that part in the report.
I did. I as you know, I get a Google alert when those rankings come out, and I send them to you probably before you even have your first cup of coffee in the morning, just to make sure that, Wilmington gets our respect. But that is something that I worked very hard to promote. There are actually 2 different rankings. There's Startup Blink and Startup Genome. Startup Genome is a U.S. company that does the research, and Startup Blink is out of Jerusalem. So yes, I'm very proud of that, because when you talk about the pro-business cities of North Carolina, Wilmington usually doesn't make the list. It's Charlotte and Raleigh and whatever else is left. And the people at Live Oak Bank and their accomplishments with Live Oak Bank and Encino and Aperture, and especially Canopy Ventures, which is now the largest venture fund in the South for technology companies, is right there at the beach in North Carolina. So I'm very proud of these rankings. We've worked very hard. One of the things that we got the boost from in the latest ranking is participation levels, which means how many people are coming out to ecosystem events. And as you know, you've heard me say it 5,000 times, that we have the largest monthly attendance in Wilmington of any startup organization in all of North Carolina. And that sounds ridiculous to say, given the size of the Raleigh-Durham ecosystem, but there are more than 40 organizations in the Triangle, as part of the ecosystem. So they've got a really fragmented audience, and we don't have the same level of competition because we're not the same size city. We're a very small city, 128,000 people, but we're accomplishing things with cities that are older than America is. Oxford, England was the one city that we hadn't passed until this year. And obviously that city was around much before 1776. So we're very proud of the accomplishments of the ecosystem that's now really just 11 years old.
You have good reason to be proud, and I'm glad you feel the sense of accomplishment of that, because I do believe you and just a handful of others have a big reason they've gone up. What I might say, if you could tolerate a little bit of, I suspect I'm older than you, so I'm going to say older brotherly advice. Just take it with a little grain of salt, because these listicles, when you rank high in them, you want to celebrate them for all good reason. But when you slip in them as well, like, take it with a grain of salt, because as is this one and every other one, Startup Genome's the same. The Doing Business, the World Bank, had the Doing Business rankings, which they discontinued that a couple of years ago because people just started calling bullshit on it a little bit. And so in the startup link, right, like, part of the index ranking is the Corruption Perception Index. Okay, like, oh, what source of data is that, right? Or the branches of multinational companies and brands, and this is from the report, e.g., WeWork spaces. Oh, so if we had more defunct WeWork spaces, in our metro area.
No, I'm aware of the rankings. Part of what I talk about, the reason Wilmington has gone up so fast is really what other cities aren't doing, or, hey, when the Encino exit kind of fades out of that ranking, yes, Wilmington is going to fall in the rankings unless Aperture takes its place, so I'm fully aware of it.
It's a good, don't misunderstand me. It's a good thing. I'm not poo-pooing it. I don't, like, I remember you told me, like, one of the big things is that how they measure engagement is, I think that's consolidating on Eventbrite. Is that what it is?
Yeah, they don't use Eventbrite participation or registrations. They only use meetup.com.
Yeah, Meetup. That's what it is, right? And so I think about our summit. Like, we don't use Meetup, we don't use Eventbrite, and forgive me for not knowing the company we use, but it's a North Carolina company, which is why we use it, right? Like, so there's an event that brings together several hundred people around entrepreneurship that should be immediately injecting right into the vein of the index. That's not, because we're just not using one of their arbitrary platforms. So that's all I was trying to say. It is still, especially for as consistently inconsistent or consistently whatever it is, you're going up, you being Wilmington. And again, that's largely attributable to maybe a handful of people, and you being like the thumb of that hand. That has to be acknowledged, and it's great. Um, Christian gave me the hook here, as you can see, a 5-minute warning. So a habit we're closing these out on is to just really recognize with our guests how much we're connected, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if you've already listened to a few of these, so you anticipated the question I'm going to ask. But how many mutual connections would you guess we have on LinkedIn?
I do know the number, 711.
Oh, mine says 712.
Okay, well, maybe one in the last week. I saw that when I watched the Tom Snyder podcast. That's how I knew that question was coming. So I was like, well, I don't know that number. So yes, that's another great thing. Well, I don't know. I have a very curious mind, so I would go and look up that number. That is part of my personality, is this curiosity factor.
It's one of many reasons why you're as good at this as you are. So a little sampling of that is basically the entire staff of, Mutual is the entire staff of NC Idea, and all of our, siblings in the core review cadre we share. You've got the two Colopes we share, which, by the way, for the listeners, not related, but Tom and Joe Jay Bigelow, you've already mentioned. You know who else we share? And I miss this bugger. I really do. Tom Hall.
Sure. Yes.
Tom, when for the brief time we had him in the ecosystem, he's back up in that stupid little city called Brooklyn in New York, I think is where that is. I'm just being an idiot.
Up in the Arctic North, as I call it.
That's right. So it's always fun when I prep for these to like see our mutual connections. And when I saw Tom's name, I was like, oh, there's a guy. I'm going to get him on the podcast. I think it's
Oh, nice. You'd have to talk some Red Sox baseball.
Yeah, I can do that. I can fake my way through it. I'm not the sports fanatic that you are. Although I will say that I understand the value to the community when a franchise is doing very, very well. So, and then let's see, finally, F. Scott Moody, who is, I think, full time in your ecosystem now. Because
he sure is. Well, he's got 2 grandbabies in the at the coast. So if you ever need to put a smile on Scott's face, just mention the grandbabies and his mood completely changes from business mode to proud grandfather.
Trust me, I can relate. My wife is not with me on this, but I cannot wait to be an Opa, which is the German word for that. And my wife is like, oh, we can put that off. But the closest to it of my 3 kids, my eldest is 30. His significant others recently moved in, and we love her, and we're looking forward to the day she becomes an official part of the family. And I was like, when are you guys going to start having babies? And my son was like, we're not even married yet, Dad. I was like, oh, who gives a shit about that? Right? Like, come on, man. Times are different right now. Right. I'm going to love that kid, whether you guys are sharing a piece of metal on your finger or not.
Right.
And so, yeah, I can relate to those people that start and retire as they get close to retirement, start like they're planning on where they're going to live based upon where grandkids are. So I'm ready for that stage.
That's a surprisingly big, large part of the growth of North Carolina right now is the, if you read about Charlotte, the number of, recent college graduates who live in Charlotte, but their parents move when the grandchild is born. And that's who's filling up those high-rise condos that are priced out of young people. It's the grandparents that are buying some of those high-priced condos.
My in-laws did the exact same thing, but in an opposite way. So they were living in Charlotte in this very nice 55 and over community. And when their daughter had yet another child, they were like, okay, time to move back up to Northeast Ohio. And so they made a very nice return on their property because it appreciated well here in North Carolina. They went back to be close to the grandbaby. Your son is 17, so hopefully you're not going to deal with that for a few more years.
No, but my mother moved from California to North Carolina to be near her grandson. So I've lived that, and that has to be her favorite part of the weekend morning is to make some pancakes for her grandson. So I'm well aware of the infatuation between the grandparent and the grandchild.
Well, that is one wholesome image to end this podcast on. Jim, I can't thank you enough. I really enjoyed spending time with you. I don't think I get a chance to say that enough, usually because I'm in whatever mode, right? You all get to be get to be the kids in the chairs throwing spitballs, and I got to be the adult in the front of the room.
You're the firefighter putting out the fires among the conference somewhere.
But so please accept this as my hearty appreciation for what you do, and I look forward to doing this with you for many more years to come.
Well, I'm a big fan of your organization. You know that because you're thanked in every newsletter we put out. So thank you for your support and your friendship. And I hope 2025 is an even greater year to come.
I suspect it will. Thank you, Jim.
Stay connected with NC Idea on LinkedIn and Facebook, and subscribe to our newsletter for all the latest as we celebrate our 20th year. Catch new episodes of Ecosysteming every other Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in and being a part of this thing of ours.